Good afternoon, everyone. Just settling down for a quick second video here. Now that I got my lighter, I'm going to light some of this awesome incense. Lama Chodpa, the natural Tibetan incense. Prayed over by monks for 12 hours a day for 15 days, or at least one of the ingredients. We got this on accident. It was ordered, my wife ordered me a Grateful Dead, awesome Grateful Dead fleece hoodie for Christmas. When it came, it was the wrong hoodie, and it was too small, and it had a thing of incense, and we're lazy when it comes to setting stuff back, so she ended up finding it fit her, so she kept it. But this incense is wonderful. So I thought I'd set it up here for a moment while I'm talking. And today, I'm going to talk a little bit about familiarity versus novelty, altruism and selfishness. Really, it's about bias. So, without further ado, when I say bias, news comes to mind, news organizations, media, and how there was something called the, well, back in the 80s, there was like a Fair Media Act that had been going for, basically it was kind of an unspoken agreement, and I believe it was in law too, that said that media stations, news channels, shouldn't be biased. And at the time that made sense because there was limited news. So if you had all the news stations biased on one way or the other, you'd never get any facts about the things that you really need to hear. So in the 80s, when Reagan was in office, he abolished that. And basically it gave media the right to stick to whatever side they want. And this is when, Fox News and CBS and all the people went their own way. Well, today we don't need a fair media clause or law. In fact, media has to be biased. And I didn't feel this way 5 years ago. I didn't even feel this way 2 years ago. I thought media should be honest and fair and give the story. And I've changed my tone over the last couple of years. The more I understand bias and how important and crucial it is for us to really get to the bottom of things. If you don't like the news today, you can change to another station. It's not like we're stuck with the television. By allowing media to be biased, what it does is it gives us a better idea of who has the loudest voice, but also, and I know a lot of times it's who has the most money, because when it comes to television, it's who's willing to pay for their point of view, and usually that's the larger companies. They've always wanted to make cigarettes seem awesome, alcohol seem awesome, and oil seem like the greatest thing, gasoline, all these things where nobody could talk bad about them on national television, because it wasn't allowed by the, the people who ran, at least the right-wing, extreme, I don't want to use right and left on this one, I would just say that the ones who are lobbied to the greatest, because it's on both sides. There's no party when it comes to profit. So, bias allows us to really see how people feel and get their honest opinion, even the journalists themselves. There really isn't any journalism anymore in media. It's become ridiculous. It's just people repeating what the other ones say, which started, a couple elections ago, when we found out that people were reporting that, one president, I think it was they predicted that, like, Gore won and they were wrong, or maybe it was, I can't remember, but, they were just copying Fox News, just repeating what they hear from each other. I mean, that's not journalism. You don't just, like, go watch another news station and report it, but that's what they do. And what it became is that media became about entertainment, not about learning anything, not about really getting the true scoop. If people want the true scoop now, they can do their research. But this isn't about media. I shouldn't have even gotten into that. But really it's just about bias itself. There are people who believe that, let's see, there's the people who accuse others of being neo-Marxists, and then those guys who accuse the others of being neo-Nazis. And really they're just individual people who are just labeled because they believe a certain way, even if they're leaning slightly left or slightly right. But bias is important. It gives us the ability to really see who we are and to see what matters to us. How boring would the world be if there was no bias? If everyone was just like, meh, that's alright. I mean, you really got to think it through as a species and realize these things that, the bias allows us to see the bare bones of what's really going on. And what's happened and why many people are frustrated with this kind of extreme social justice warrior attack on, at least this is what they say, that they're attacking free speech by wanting safe spaces and being, triggered by certain terms and words. I understand where they're coming from when they feel that. But I also believe that we as people have the right to be treated fairly and respectfully within our communities. So we want to feel safe in the home that we live in order to call it a country. If we can't, if we can be insulted by others and degraded by people around us, that's a very tough situation, a tough line. One's freedom of speech, and the other angle is, fairness and honesty and caring and compassion about people that may be a minority. People feel very different about these subjects, and I can completely understand why. When people feel judged, they feel righteous. So the more of a minority a person is, the more likely they are to feel persecuted and judged. Because of this persecution and judgment, they feel like they can retaliate way out of balance with anyone who says anything. For example, I talked to my brother. I had this post. We were talking back and forth. I was saying something about trigger words and how people get triggered, and he said, well, I've never seen that with anybody. And I said, well, come on, surely you've seen somebody, take something way out of context because they think that you're attacking someone. And he said, actually, yeah. And he remembered he was out in eastern Washington or something one time, and he said something about a Beaners, and this lady just freaked out on him, this white chick, and they're Mexicans, don't talk about Mexicans that way. And he was like, actually, my best friend was Mexican. We used to call him a beaner all the time. We called each other beaners. To him, it wasn't an insult. He was just using the term. It would be kind of like if you had a gay friend and you called him a fag, and then somebody else heard it and they thought, hey, that's really demeaning and insulting. So what's happening is words are becoming harder for people to get away with saying, and they feel like they're cornered and trapped. The ultimate one would be nigger. Nobody wants to say that word. It's a horrible word. But the whole black community, a lot of them use it. But it's not the white man's word. You can't use it. But it depends on whether you're using it as a definition or derogatory, and it doesn't matter. People don't want to hear it. You say that word and ears perk up, Of course, it's offensive. I'm not going to sit here and label and name off all the, all the words that are offensive. You know what I'm getting at. The fact that, if you say something like that, then all of a sudden you get jumped on. You have to be like, I'm not a racist, I swear, I swear. Of course, there's no real context in which you should be using that word. And a lot of the other ones. I think as a society, we should grow out of using offensive words. Instead of being stubborn and saying, well, I should be able to say whatever I want, we should willingly decide, I don't want to use that term anymore because it's offensive to people. Not put laws into effect that people feel like, the law should protect me against this. Or by calling someone this, it's a hate crime because he used a certain word. And I get it. I know where people are coming from on both angles on that one. So, really it comes down to a lot of people disliking others that they've never met. And a lot of xenophobia and fear. But the bias will always be there. It's about how we handle it. It's okay to be biased because we have different viewpoints. Bias comes down to the most mundane things. Like, what Tootsie Roll pop flavor do you like? What ice cream flavor do you like, Where do you think would be the best place to live for the rest of your life? How much money do you think these people should be able to get for this type of work? And, everyone's biased because they all have different opinions. It's the extremely sensitive spots that we get really bothered with. You won't be offended if someone else has a different ice cream flavor. You will be offended if they have a different view on whether immigrants should be allowed to cross the border, because it's race involved and it becomes a minority. See what I mean? So when people are directly affected by bias, which they always are, we need to address that and stop and say, which side is right? Because just because a person is biased doesn't mean that they're rightly biased. It means that if two people have opposite ends of a bias scale, then one of them it could be right and the other could be wrong. Doesn't mean that that's always the case, though, because there are cases where things aren't black and white, and usually they're not black and white. But there are some things which, yes, aren't a personal choice, such as like, well, it's my personal choice to punch people when I walk into the grocery store. Of course that wouldn't be acceptable. There are limits, and not just extreme limits, but, you know, obviously we don't want a society where we feel like we're demeaned and insulted because of how we look, our sexual orientation, color of our skin, our gender. All these things are important to people. And what's happened is now that people have power, or feel like they have power, we've overcompensated by becoming majorly sensitive, and whole groups of people attacking people who make a statement. And with good reason, too. Something like that Judge Moore in Alabama, a lot of these guys who made, harsh comments in the past towards races, or, Jeff Sessions saying people who smoke marijuana are horrible people. All of these things come out and people are like, jump on somebody for something they said because that's bias, and here comes the retaliation because your bias sucks. So I'm just addressing the issue. I'm definitely not making any pointers here of any statements of, this is good or this is bad, but the fact that we're biased, and that I think it's an important part of the learning process. It's about things that we don't understand, trying to understand as a species. So, peace and love and all that stuff, and I'll talk to y'all later. Take care.